So in Jane Austen's Emma Woodhouse cannot stand Jane Fairfax. But why? They're a similar age, everyone thinks they should be best friends, but they just can't get along. What is the problem here? Well, that is what we're diving here into today's video. What the Emma-Jane Fairfax relationship dynamic teaches us about Regency ideas around women, their accomplishments, and their education. If you'd like to learn all about that, then definitely stay tuned. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. So why does Emma not like Jane Fairfax? That is a very complex question that has multiple factors. It does not help that she's hiding a secret engagement throughout the book, which makes her extra secretive and closed off from everybody. However, this tension between Emma and Jane is far, far longer standing than Jane's engagement, so there's a deeper issue at play here. And what is that? Well, the book gives us a hint with the way Emma reacts when she hears that Jane is coming back to town. It says, Emma was sorry to have to pay civilities to a person she did not like through 3 long months, to be always doing more than she wished and less than she ought. Why she did not like Jane Fairfax might be a difficult question to answer. Mr. Knightley had once told her it was because she saw in her the really accomplished young woman, which she wanted to be thought herself. And though the accusation had been eagerly refuted at the time, there were moments of self-examination in which her conscience could not quite acquit her. So here we see Emma contemplating her issues with Jane, and one of the key aspects is Jane Fairfax's level of accomplishment. Now, if you're not sure what accomplishment is, we're going to delve deeper into that in a little bit, but basically, it was that she's worked very hard to have all of these skills that were necessary for women to have to be truly esteemed in the time period. And Emma's like, why does she have so many? And why does she make me look bad in comparison? And even Emma's sister is there later in the book to rave about Jane Fairfax and all her accomplishments. This is what her sister says. Jane Fairfax one knows to be very accomplished and superior, and exactly Emma's age. So there we have Emma, always constantly reminded of just how accomplished Jane is. So why does it bother her so much that Jane is more accomplished than her? And that, my friends, is because it ties directly in to the Regency ideal of an accomplished woman. But exactly what was this ideal of an accomplished woman? Why did it matter? What purpose did it serve Regency society? Well, let's dive into that. I think one of the first things that's important to remember about women in the Regency era is that they were human beings. And human beings, no matter what time period they're born in, have the same basic drives and needs psychologically. Humans have needs for achievement, accomplishment, esteem, merit, feeling like they've worked hard for things, mastery. And basically, those same drives were within Regency women, only the world they lived in severely limited how they could fill those needs. So for example, today a woman can go to a prestigious university, become a neurosurgeon, master the skill, become world-renowned, and if she has a very high esteem, achievement, accomplishment drive, there you go. That is her route to that. However, that's not open to Regency women. Rather, they were limited to a very small sphere of activity in which they could excel, in which they could master, in which they could achieve. And this was largely defined by gender roles. So if you've seen my video I made recently on gender roles, you will remember that a few basic things were that men were superior to women, women were there to make men's lives better, happier, and more softened and refined. Now, that sphere that women had of being good wives and mothers and making their husbands happy was the sphere in which they could achieve and accomplish and excel. That was their little area of doing anything in their lives well. So Regency girls grew up in a world where their opportunities to excel at anything were confined to this little sphere. Even when it came to something as simple as book learning, some families more actively restricted how much their daughters could learn from books because they were worried that too much education would compromise their daughters' ability to fulfill their roles as wives and mothers. As one American author put it in 1830, so much depends on the approbation of the stronger sex, that women of cultivated understandings sometimes find themselves but poorly rewarded for their industry in the attainment of knowledge. They meet either with a sneer or an equivocal compliment, and have the mortification of finding that all their trouble has only unfitted them for pleasing those with whom they are to spend their lives. To this is frequently added the poignant mortification of discovering that some superficial girl with a few trifling accomplishments is preferred to them. The fact is that men are jealous of literary and scientific ladies, and not without cause. For though they have little chance of being surpassed in these attainments, they have a pretty strong one of finding no one to superintend their domestic establishments with skill, or attend properly to the homely minutiae of the household department. This is no inconsiderable evil to a man who has entered into a rational calculation of the true requisites to domestic content. Therefore, it is best for women to keep themselves from conflicting with the prejudices of the other sex. So here we see that if a woman wants to become accomplished in the literary or scientific communities, well, guess what? That will make her unattractive, and no man will want to marry her, and she failed at her main purpose of being pleasing to men. This is why you really got to watch out and make sure your daughters don't learn too much from books. And this is really an echo of something very similar we see written decades earlier in Frances Burney's Evelina, which I'm sure you guys remember me talking about before, is a novel written by one of Jane Austen's favorite authors. Now, in that novel, she creates a very learned woman, almost to point out just how obnoxious that is. So the main character, Evelina, describes this learned woman this way. Mrs. Selwyn is very kind and attentive to me. She is extremely clever. Her understanding, indeed, may be called masculine, but unfortunately, her manners deserve the same epitaph. For, in studying to acquire the knowledge of the other sex, she has lost all the softness of her own. In regard to myself, however, as I have neither courage nor inclination to argue with her, I have never been personally hurt at her want of gentleness, a virtue which nevertheless seems so essential a part of the female character that I find myself more awkward and less at ease with a woman who wants it than I do with a man. So here we see this very traditional idea that there are two types of knowledge in the world. There's knowledge fit for women, and there's knowledge fit for men. And this woman did the terrible crime of learning knowledge fit for men, and thereby that has made her masculine and not soft, which is, of course, one of the defining feature of women, because remember, they're supposed to be softening the manners of their husband, as we went into in the gender roles video. If you haven't watched that one already, this will probably make more sense if you've seen that. So we definitely see that a girl would not want to become too educated in this time period and thereby be less pleasing to men. However, at the same exact time, she did not want to be too uneducated because that would also make her unpleasing to men. As we see Mr. Darcy talk about in his ideal accomplished woman in Pride and Prejudice, he says that she needs to do this. All this she must possess. And to all she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. So here we have Mr. Darcy being like, yes, she must possess all these accomplishments, but she does need some substantial reading. And this was on the more progressive side of Regency society, this idea that for a woman to make a true companion to a man, she needs to be educated enough to be able to hold reasonably intelligent conversations with him. Now, this is an idea we see developed in another novel by one of Jane Austen's favorite authors called Belinda by Maria Edgeworth. And here we see her describe sort of the ideal family matron in her mind, her level of education, and how ultimately that benefits her husband. Lady Anne Percival had, without any pedantry or ostentation, much accurate knowledge and a taste for literature, which made her the chosen companion of her husband's understanding as well as of his heart. He was not obliged to reserve his conversation for friends of his own sex, nor was he forced to seclude himself in the pursuit of any branch of knowledge. The partner of his warmest affections was also the partner of his most serious occupations, and her sympathy and approbation and the daily sense of her success in the education of their children inspired him with a degree of happy social energy unknown to the selfish, solitary votaries of avarice and ambition. So here we see Lady Anne educated enough to be this mental companion for her husband. And this is really a progressive take on female education, right? This is trying to demonstrate within the novel and show everybody, like, imagine guys, imagine if your wife was like this. Imagine if you could talk to her about serious things and she knew what you were saying. Wouldn't that be nice? And we see it presented in this very Georgian way, where even though it appears like we're talking about Lady Anne, we're actually talking about her husband, right? He's the one with the companion. He's the one being inspired with social energy. He's the one happy to see her raising his children. He's the one who now is having the domestic bliss that a wife is supposed to be bringing her husband. So here we sort of see this fine balance women needed to walk. They needed to be educated enough to make their husbands happier and feel like they had a reasonably intelligent companion, but at the same time, they could not get too smart and make him feel insecure or challenged in any way. So thereby, they have to limit themselves and only become moderately successful at book learning. But of course, this does bring up the question then, how is a woman supposed to fill her need for achievement and accomplishment if she can't do it through book learning? And also, what does she need to do to better fulfill her purpose of pleasing men? This, my friends, is where accomplishments come in. And we can really see how all these factors tie in to being an accomplished woman in this Regency era take on it. The most miserable of creatures are those who do not avail themselves of their means for attaining the end for which nature has destined them. Now, what other destination can a woman have than that of becoming a wife and mother? When talents and accomplishments are well employed, they procure husbands for young ladies and furnish them with all that is requisite for bringing up a family. In fact, young ladies, by studying the modern languages, qualify themselves for instructing their children, and especially their daughters, which will afford them the pleasure of performing the noblest and tenderest of duties, and likewise that of saving money, which is too frequently thrown away on worthless masters. Previously to marriage, during marriage, and even in old age, the accomplishments of females ought to tend to one subject, that of love. So here we see a woman's accomplishments revolving around the man, from attracting him, to showing him love, to raising his children, to saving him money. And this, my friends, is why men really need to be on the lookout for an accomplished woman. But what does an accomplished woman look like? Great question. But I will say that if an accomplished woman was living in 2025, she'd definitely enjoy this video's sponsor, Son de Fleur. So Son de Fleur is a sustainable, slow fashion brand that crafts timeless style with ethically made linen. Whenever I wear one of their dresses, I feel like I'm transported into a storybook. So, for example, I have on their Carmen dress from their fall-winter collection. It makes me feel like a Renaissance princess who has been banished to the desert edges of her father's kingdom, for she fell in love with the wrong prince. Will he come to save me, or will I be stuck out here in the dirt forever? I don't know, but I do know that I love Son de Fleur's European style that transcends any time period. It breathes history into the modern and modern into the history. So, for example, it has the twirlable skirt every princess needs, but also pockets, which are essential for the modern woman. And right now in October, you can get an amazing deal. They are giving 15% off almost all of their products when you use my code Ellie Dashwood, and also covering the tariff fee for US shoppers. So right now is the best time to stock up on fall fashions. Click the link in the description below and shop them today. Now, back to the video. But what does an accomplished woman look like? Well, we hear in that passage that she knows the modern languages, which, if that sounds familiar, it might be making you think of the sum up Carolyn Bingley gives us of an accomplished woman in Pride and Prejudice. Here's what she says. Oh, certainly. No one can be really esteemed accomplished who does not greatly surpass what is usually met with. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to deserve the word. And besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her dress and expressions, or the word would be but half deserved. So here we see Caroline lay out a great and wonderful list of things that women can actually excel in because they are all incredibly useful to her future husband. So first of all, we see some major categories coming down, including modern languages, which would have been French, Italian, and German. Why? Well, because a lot of books are published in those languages, which, is important to read and better yourself to a certain point, not too much again. But also Italian operas. So for example, in Persuasion, we see Anne Elliot going to a concert with her cousin, Mr. Elliot, and there is an Italian song being sung. But who will help him understand it? Well, Anne. Here's what the book says. Anne's mind was in a most favorable state for the entertainment of the evening. Towards the close of it, in the interval succeeding an Italian song, she explained the words of the song to Mr. Elliot. They had a concert bill between them. This, said she, is nearly the sense, or rather the meaning of the words, for certainly the sense of an Italian love song must not be talked of, but it is as nearly the meaning as I can give, for I do not pretend to understand the language. I am a very poor Italian scholar. Yes, I see you are. I see you know nothing of the matter. You have only knowledge enough of the language to translate at sight these inverted, transposed, curtailed Italian lines into clear, comprehensible, elegant English. You need not say anything more of your ignorance. Here is complete proof. So here we see Anne Elliot fulfilling her womanly purpose. She is there helping Mr. Elliot. She's helping his refinement through this concert and understanding Italian, and she is being very pleasing and attractive to him. So she's just laying everything when it comes to being an accomplished woman with modern languages. And guess what? If they have kids, she can help her daughters learn Italian and thereby save on the master fees. See? It's all coming together now. We see other areas women can excel in, like music, piano playing, singing, harp playing. Also the arts, like drawing and watercolor, oil painting, some women did, but that was also kind of seen as the male domain. Like watercolor was more for women, oil was more for men. You could technically cross, but did you want to? No, because you didn't want men to sneer at you. Remember, we're avoiding the sneers in the Regency era. Another category is, of course, crafts. We see there in Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Bingley give us this big list. And of course, we hear Georgiana drawing up a beautiful little design for a table, right? She's going to paint on this table and make it all pretty. And now they'll have prettier furniture at Pemberley. And like her brother will be so happy. Of course, this category would also include needlework, which was essential for a woman, no matter her station, whether she was a servant darning socks up to a lady doing fancy work. It did not matter. You needed to do a lot of sewing in life. And also we see personal carriage, movement, the way you bow often told a lot about you. I have a whole video on curtsies that I feel like people need to watch more because I give you tutorials on how to curtsy like Elizabeth Bennet. I'm just saying here. So if you really start looking at this collective sphere in which women could excel, they could put their efforts into, you start to see how it lines up with their purposes in society, right? So first of all, if we go back to the gender role of women being the very civilized, refined, softening influence on humanity, you can see how a lot of these tie into that. A woman who's out there studying art is training her eye, elevating her taste, becoming more religious in the time period. It was often thought because she was observing creation, which would make her think about God and make her a more moral and virtuous person. And two, a lot of these are activities that are just naturally pleasant to do. Women today take up playing the piano or painting or crochet to unwind and just really enjoy life. And likewise for Regency women who are going to become the mistresses of these big estates, yes, they had a lot to do, right? As we cover in my video on a day in Elizabeth Darcy's life, they had so much to do, but at the same time, there would be slow times where they're out in the middle of nowhere, more or less, and they're gonna be bored. And having all of these skills is something to rely on for their whole life, right? They're like, well, I have nothing else to do, but I can go play the piano and then paint something. So one Regency writer put it this way: these accomplishments may be retained to cheer her own solitude, to enliven and compose the spirits of her husband and children, and to gratify the circle of which she is a member. And when friends shall have departed, and life is wearing away, and the senses are beginning to fail, the accomplishments of her youth may be the solace of her age. So of course here we see these accomplishments throughout her life, bringing her husband happiness, her children happiness, those in her social sphere happiness, but also herself happiness. Not only when she's younger, but especially when she's older and maybe her husband has passed away. In her widowhood, she can be playing the piano. So that is how accomplishments help a woman become a better woman and thereby help her uplift men. But if you're going to uplift a man, you first need to attract him, which is where accomplishments come into. So we definitely need to remember how much of a social respect, hierarchy, refinement, polish based society the Regency was, because it did affect what men were looking for in wives. Basically, they were looking for wives that added to the refinement of their families, to the elevation of their families, to the honor and reputation of their families. Basically meaning that if you were raising a Regency era daughter, you needed to make sure that she had a certain level of accomplishment in order to be able to attract a husband, because she needed to bring honor into that marriage and not the dishonor of her being completely unaccomplished and unrefined. But once you got her past that point, there was another key factor when it comes to the attraction of accomplishments. And that's the basic idea that a beautiful woman doing a beautiful activity will look more beautiful. We see this well described in Mansfield Park when it comes to Mary playing the harp and Edmund sitting there watching her. The book says, "A young woman, pretty, lively, with a harp as elegant as herself, and both placed near a window, cut down to the ground, and opening on a little lawn, surrounded by shrubs and the rich foliage of summer, was enough to catch any man's heart." That is right. Edmund just cannot look away. Look at her with this beautiful harp. she looks even more beautiful. And that was the basic idea of it. Pretty woman doing pretty activity equals marriage proposal. Now, of course, once married, these skills made her a better wife and mother, brightening up the family circle. We can just imagine after Marianne Dashwood is married, the evenings they will have with her playing the piano and him sitting there being like, oh, this is so great. My wife plays the piano and I sit here and I listen to her. Marriage is amazing. And he really does enjoy marriage, as the In Sense and Sensibility says. Colonel Brandon was now as happy as all those who best loved him believed he deserved to be. In Marianne, he was consoled for every past affliction. Her regard and her society restored his mind to animation, and his spirits to cheerfulness. And that Marianne found her own happiness in forming his was equally the persuasion and delight of each observing friend. So here we see Marianne healing his heart with her society and doubtlessly her piano playing. And her main happiness is over there realizing that she is making him happy. Meanwhile, the skill of Marianne's is also incredibly useful because, again, they did not have records in the Regency era. If you wanted music, somebody had to play it. So basically, a husband marrying a woman who was accomplished at music in this era was kind of like, I don't have a record collection, but I do have a wife. See, they're thinking it through. They're like, I like music sometimes. I should marry a musician. So that's Marianne, but what about Eleanor and her drawing? That is another incredibly useful skill in this era because they did not have cameras. So for example, say Edward and Eleanor have a little baby and she's like, oh, he's so cute. I need to send a portrait of this baby to someone. I need to send it to my mom. She needs a picture of this baby. Well, exactly how is she going to get that? She could spend the money to hire an actual artist to create a portrait of this baby, but more than likely with her skill set, she herself is going to draw a picture of the baby to be able to send it to her mom. And all of us here are actually very indebted to an accomplished woman in the drawing department, and that is Cassandra Austen. She is the one who gave us the only portrait of Jane Austen that we know is definitely 100% her. Like, this is her face. Admittedly, even people in the time period did not think it was a completely super accurate portrait. They do think Jane was prettier in real life than Cassandra was able to capture with her skill level. However, without Cassandra's hard work to become an accomplished woman, we would have 0 pictures of Jane Austen. So again, these accomplishments were not just decorative, they were incredibly useful, which brings us all back to the original question of why Emma can't stand Jane Fairfax. We see how essential to a woman's identity being accomplished is. It is how they fulfill their purpose in life of helping men be more refined and happy. And it's one of the few areas in which they can actually earn respect and esteem in Regency society and fulfill their needs for achievement. And so it's very natural for Emma to want to feel like she's doing well at this. This is her society's ideal of what she should be as a woman. And she doesn't do terrible at it. She's actually pretty good. She can play the piano well enough to carry it off at the Coles party. She's able to do a watercolor of Miss Smith that is very pretty. However, whenever Jane Fairfax comes around, she gets insecure. Basically, when Jane Fairfax is not around, Emma is the big fish in the small pond. When it comes to the little Highbury society, Emma is actually quite accomplished. And then Jane shows up and is even the bigger fish. And then Emma's like, now I'm the tiny fish. And this, of course, is quite a hit on Emma's self-image and self-esteem. Of course, thankfully, we know by the end of the book, she works through this and quite likes Jane Fairfax. So let me know in the comments down below, if you lived in the Regency era, would you be working hard on accomplishments? And which ones would you be working hard on? Anyway, let me know in the comments down below. And also special shout out to my channel members. Hi, there are so many of you now. I'm just like, our community is just getting so big. I just need to wave to you all. And as always, guys, keep being awesome because you're awesome. Bye.